The metallic hum of the space station's gravity generators barely masked the thunderous roar from the underground arena, deep beneath the diplomatic quarters of Station Nexus 7, where ambassadors from a dozen species pretended to get along. The real business of the galaxy took place. Blood, sweat, and credits flowed like rivers in the fighting pits. Jake Morrison wiped grease from his hands with a dirty rag, cursing under his breath as another hydraulic line burst on the waste processing unit. 6 months of this garbage job, literally, and he still couldn't afford passage back to Earth. The pay was terrible, the hours were worse, and his supervisor was a four-armed slug creature who seemed to take personal pleasure in making his life miserable. Morrison. The voice boomed through the maintenance tunnels. Supervisor Glaxon's slime trail glistened in the artificial light as he slithered toward Jake's workstation. The atmospheric recyclers in Sector 12 are malfunctioning again. Fix them before the night shift, or you're docked another week's pay. Jake gritted his teeth and nodded. Another week's pay meant another month stuck on this floating circus of alien bureaucracy. He grabbed his toolkit and headed through the maze of corridors, taking a wrong turn somewhere near the diplomatic quarters. The sound of cheering grew louder as he descended deeper into the station's bowels. Following the noise out of curiosity, Jake found himself on a viewing platform overlooking the underground arena. The sight below made him stop dead in his tracks. A circular pit stretched 50 meters across, surrounded by tiered seating packed with every species imaginable. Insectoid Kithra clicked their mandibles in excitement, while furry Valdorians howled their approval. Even some of the more civilized races had representatives in the crowd, though they tried to hide their enthusiasm behind diplomatic masks. In the center of the arena, a mountain of muscle and chitin stood triumphant over a fallen opponent. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, its 6 arms ending in claws that could rend steel. Crimson scales covered most of its body, with patches of bone-white armor plating along its chest and shoulders. 2 sets of eyes, each the size of dinner plates, scanned the crowd with predatory satisfaction. Ladies and gentlemen, beings of all species. The announcer's voice crackled through the arena's speakers. A small, purple creature with too many teeth stood at a podium near the edge of the pit. Zorax the Unstoppable has claimed another victory. That's 17 consecutive wins, 15 by knockout and 2 by... He paused dramatically, creative dismemberment. The crowd went wild. Credits changed hands as bookmakers settled bets and took new ones. Jake watched in fascination as Zorax flexed all 6 arms, each one easily twice the size of Jake's torso. The fallen opponent, some kind of crystalline being, was being swept up by maintenance crews with brooms and dustpans. Now, the announcer continued, his voice rising to a fever pitch. Zorax has issued a challenge to the galaxy. He claims no being in known space can defeat him in single combat. Barehanded, no weapons, no armor, no tricks. The prize stands at 500,000 galactic credits to anyone brave enough or stupid enough to accept. 500,000 credits. Jake's mind raced. That was enough to buy his own ship, maybe even a small trading vessel. He could leave this nightmare job, leave the station, and never look back. But facing that monster in the pit below seemed like suicide with extra steps. Furthermore, the announcer's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried through the entire arena. Our champion has made a special declaration regarding one particular species. Zorax believed that humans are the weakest, most pathetic creatures in the galaxy. Soft, slow, and completely useless in combat. The crowd laughed, a cacophony of sounds that ranged from squeaks to roars. Jake felt his jaw clench. He'd been dealing with that attitude for months. Every alien he'd encountered seemed to think humans were barely above pets in terms of capability. The diplomatic corps kept humans in menial positions, claiming they weren't suited for more important work. Zorax raised one of his massive claws, and the arena fell silent. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel in a cement mixer. Humans, pathetic pink creatures. I have seen them scurry through the station like frightened vermin. Weak, slow, no claws, no natural armor, no fangs worth mentioning. If any human thinks they can challenge me, I will make their death quick out of pity. The crowd erupted again. Jake felt something hot and familiar burning in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had in basic training, when Drill Sergeant Martinez told him he'd never make it to the program. The same feeling when his ex-wife said he'd never amount to anything. The same feeling that had driven him to become one of the youngest engineering officers in the Colonial Fleet before the budget cuts left him unemployed and desperate. You know what? Jake muttered to himself. Screw it. He made his way down to the arena floor, pushing through crowds of spectators. The bouncer at the entrance was a hulking creature that looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a steamroller. It looked down at Jake with obvious amusement. You lost, little human? The custodial areas are 3 levels up. I'm here to fight, Jake said quietly. The bouncer blinked slowly, as if processing information that didn't make sense. Then he started laughing, a sound like boulders tumbling down a mountain. You hear that? He called to his partner. The little human wants to fight. Within minutes, word had spread through the arena. Jake found himself standing in a small preparation chamber, signing waivers that probably weren't where the alien equivalent of paper they were printed on. The door opened and the announcer scurried in, his multiple eyes gleaming with excitement. This is unprecedented. The creature's voice was even more annoying up close. A human challenger. The betting odds are, well, they're mathematically approaching infinity. Tell me, human, do you have any combat experience? Military training? Genetic modifications? Cybernetic enhancements? Please tell me you have something that might make this interesting. Jake shrugged. I was in the Colonial Marines for 8 years. 2 tours in the Outer Rim conflicts. The announcer's face fell slightly. Oh, well, that's something, I suppose. Though I should mention that Zorax has defeated 3 former military champions from various species this month alone. Are you sure about this? The medical bay is quite busy, and we've run out of the really good painkillers. I'm sure. The crowd's roar was deafening as Jake walked into the arena. Every seat was filled, and more beings were pressed against the walls and hanging from the upper levels. He'd never seen so many different species in one place, all united in their apparent certainty that they were about to watch him die horribly. Zorax stood in the center of the pit, all 6 arms crossed over his massive chest. Up close, the alien was even more intimidating. Each of his claws was longer than Jake's fingers, and his scaled hide looked thick enough to stop small-caliber bullets. When he smiled, Jake counted at least 40 teeth, all of them designed for tearing flesh. So, Zorax rumbled, his voice carrying easily over crowd noise. The humans have sent me their champion. Tell me, little creature, what is your name? I like to know what to put on the memorial plaque. Jake stepped forward, rolling his shoulders to loosen them up. Jake Morrison. And I'm not anybody's champion. I'm just a guy who's had a really bad day and doesn't like being called pathetic. Zorax laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Spirit, I admire that. It will make your defeat more entertaining. Tell me, Jake Morrison, do you have any last words for your species? Any final message you'd like me to deliver? Jake looked up at the towering alien, then around at the thousands of spectators who were already counting him dead. His life flashed before his eyes, not the usual highlights reel, but all the moments when someone had told him he wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't worthy enough. His father saying he'd never make it in the military. His commanding officers passing him over for promotion because he was too aggressive. His ex-wife walking out because he was too intense. Well, maybe it was time to be too aggressive and too intense. Yeah, Jake said, cracking his knuckles. I've got something to say. He raised his voice so it would carry throughout the arena. My species has a saying. We didn't claw our way to the top of Earth's food chain by being reasonable. We did it by being too stubborn to quit and too crazy to realize when we're outmatched. You want to call us weak? Pathetic? Fine. But you picked the wrong human to prove your point with. The crowd fell silent. Zorax's 4 eyes narrowed to slits. You see, Jake continued, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Humans have another saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. And buddy, I've got a whole lot of fight in me. Zorax unfolded his arms, claws extending to their full length. Brave words from dead meat. Let us see if you can back them up. The bell rang. Zorax moved faster than Jake had expected. but not faster than Jake had prepared for. 8 years in the Marines had taught him that the biggest opponent wasn't always the most dangerous, but they were usually the most predictable. Big creatures relied on size and strength, which made them overconfident and sloppy. The alien's first swing came from the right, a sweeping arc that would have taken Jake's head clean off if it had connected. Instead, Jake ducked under it and drove his elbow into Zorax's ribs, right where the bone plating met the softer scales. The impact sent shock waves up his arm, but he felt something give under the blow. Zorax roared in surprise as much as pain. He spun faster than something his size should have been able to move, bringing 2 more arms around in a pincer movement. Jake rolled backward, feeling claws whistle past his face close enough to part his hair. The crowd was on its feet now, their earlier certainty replaced by shock silence. They'd expected the human to be swatted like an insect. Instead, he was moving like smoke, slipping between attacks that should have been unavoidable. "Stand still, you irritating little pest." Zorax bellowed, all 6 arms flailing in a pattern that turned the air into a maze of deadly edges. Jake grinned as he weaved through the attacks. This was what he'd been trained for, what he was good at. Not fixing toilets or unclogging air filters, but moving fast and hitting hard when it counted. For the first time in months, he felt like himself again. He feinted left, then drove right, getting inside Zorax's reach where the long arms became a disadvantage. His fist connected with the alien's solar plexus, or what he hoped was the alien equivalent. The blow drove the breath from Zorax's lungs in a sound like a punctured tire. "Impossible." Zorax gasped, staggering backward. "You're just a human." "Yeah." Jake panted, already moving to stay out of the alien's reach. "Just a human. But here's the thing about humans you might not have considered." He ducked another wild swing and landed an uppercut to Zorax's jaw that snapped the alien's head back. "We're persistence hunters. We don't give up. Ever. You can be bigger, stronger, faster, meaner. Doesn't matter. We'll keep coming until you're too tired to fight back." The truth of his words was already becoming apparent. Zorax was breathing heavily, his attacks becoming more desperate and less coordinated. The alien was built for short, brutal encounters, not extended fights. Jake, on the other hand, was just getting warmed up. "This is not possible." Zorax roared, frustration replacing confidence. "I am the champion of 17 worlds. I have never been defeated." "Well," Jake said, dodging another increasingly wild swing, "there's a first time for everything." The fight had been going for nearly 10 minutes, and the arena was in complete chaos. What had started as a foregone conclusion was turning into the upset of the century. Spectators were throwing their betting slips in disgust, while others frantically tried to place new wagers on the impossible human, who refused to die. Zorax was no longer the confident predator who had entered the ring. His breathing was labored, his movement sluggish, and worst of all, doubt had crept into his 4 eyes. He landed several glancing blows that should have pulped the human, but somehow Jake kept moving, kept fighting, kept coming back for more. "You fight like a coward." Zorax panted, swinging another haymaker that Jake easily sidestepped. "Stand and face me like a warrior." Jake laughed, the sound echoing to the suddenly quiet arena. "A coward? Let me tell you something about cowardice, big guy. A coward would have stayed upstairs fixing toilets instead of coming down here to face someone 3 times the size. A coward would have accepted your insults about my species lying down. But me? I'm not a coward. I'm just smarter than you thought." He demonstrated his point by sliding under another wild swing and hammering his fist into the back of Zorax's knee. The joint buckled, and the massive alien stumbled forward, off balance for a crucial second. Jake pressed his advantage, landing a series of rapid punches to the alien's kidney area before dancing away from the retaliatory swipe. "You see," Jake continued conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather instead of engaged in mortal combat, "humans have been fighting things bigger and stronger than us for millions of years. Saber-toothed tigers, cave bears, mammoths, other humans with bigger rocks. We learned real quick that brute strength isn't everything. Sometimes brains beat brawn." Zorax snarled and launched himself forward in a desperate charge, all 6 arms spread wide to prevent escape. It was exactly what Jake had been waiting for. Instead of dodging sideways, he dropped flat on his back and kicked upward with both feet, catching Zorax in the chest and using the alien's own momentum against him. The physics were brutal and inevitable. Zorax's 3-meter frame went flying over Jake's head, crashing into the arena wall with a sound like a building collapse. Chunks of concrete rained down as the alien slowly peeled himself out of the crater his impact had created. The crowd was absolutely silent now. Even the announcer seemed to have lost his voice. Jake rolled to his feet, breathing hard but still steady. Zorax, meanwhile, was having trouble standing upright. Green blood trickled from his mouth, and one of his arms hung at an unnatural angle. Had enough? Jake asked, genuinely hoping the answer was yes. He was tired, his knuckles were scraped raw, and he was pretty sure he'd cracked a rib during one of the exchanges. But he could keep going if he had to. Humans were built for endurance. Zorax spat green blood and glared at him with undiluted hatred. I will not be defeated by a soft pink weakling. I am Zorax the Unstoppable. I have conquered warriors from across the galaxy. Yeah, I heard your resume, Jake said, settling into a fighting stance again. Impressive stuff. But here's the thing about being unstoppable. Eventually, you meet something immovable, and then physics gets involved. Basic action-reaction stuff. You'd think a champion fighter would understand the fundamentals. With a roar that shook dust from the arena's ceiling, Zorax launched his final assault. All 5 remaining functional arms moved in perfect coordination, creating a whirlwind of claws and fury that should have shredded anything in its path. It was the kind of attack that had ended dozens of careers and lives. Jake Morrison, maintenance worker and ex-colonial Marine, looked at the incoming death storm and smiled. Time seemed to slow as his training kicked in completely. Every drill, every sparring session, every life-or-death moment from his military service crystallized into perfect clarity. He could see the pattern in Zorax's attack, the rhythm, the inevitable gaps that would appear. He stepped forward instead of back, moving into the attack instead of away from it. His left hand caught Zorax's lead arm at the wrist, redirecting it past his head. His right elbow came up in a tight arc, connecting with the alien's exposed throat with every ounce of strength he could muster. The result was immediate and decisive. Zorax's roar cut off in a strangled gasp as his windpipe compressed. His eyes went wide with shock and the first real fear he'd felt in years. He tried to bring his other arms around, but Jake was already moving, already committed to ending the fight. A knee strike to the solar plexus doubled Zorax over. An uppercut to the jaw snapped his head back. A final right cross, thrown with 8 years of suppressed frustration and anger behind it, caught the alien champion square in the temple. Zorax the Unstoppable fell like a demolished building, hitting the arena floor with an impact that cracked the concrete. He twitched once, twice, then lay still. The medical sensors built into the arena floor immediately began flashing, indicating life signs, but no consciousness. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Jake stood over his fallen opponent, chest heaving, knuckles bleeding, completely unable to believe what had just happened. Around him, thousands of beings sat in shocked stillness, their minds struggling to process the impossible thing they had just witnessed. Then, from somewhere in the upper tiers, a single voice began to cheer. It was joined by another, then another, until the entire arena erupted in the loudest roar Jake had ever heard. Beings of every species were on their feet, screaming their approval, their disbelief, their absolute amazement at what the small human had accomplished. The announcer finally found his voice again, though it came out as a squeak. Ladies and gentlemen, beings of all species, in the most shocking upset in arena history, we have a new champion. Jake Morrison, human, has defeated Zorax the Unstoppable. The impossible has happened. Jake barely heard him over the noise. He was staring down at Zorax, who was slowly regaining consciousness under the ministrations of the medical team. The alien's 4 eyes focused on him with something that might have been respect. How? Zorax croaked, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. You are just a human. Weak. Soft. How did you defeat me? Jake knelt down beside the fallen champion, his expression serious. You want to know the real secret of humans? It's not that we're the strongest or the fastest or the smartest species out there. We're not. But we got something that a lot of other species seem to have forgotten. What? Zorax whispered. We refuse to quit. When everything goes wrong, when we're outmatched and outgunned, when the smart money says we should give up and accept defeat, we keep fighting anyway. Not because we think we'll win, but because giving up isn't in our nature. We're too stubborn to know when we're beaten and too crazy to care about the odds. Jake stood up, looking around at the cheering crowd. You called us weak and pathetic. Maybe compared to you, we are. But strength isn't just about muscles and claws and natural armor. Sometimes it's about heart. And humans, we've got plenty of heart. The prize ceremony was a blur of flashing lights and alien dignitaries trying to get their pictures taken with the unlikely champion. Jake accepted the 500,000 credit chip with numb fingers, still barely able to believe his luck. More than luck, actually. Justice, maybe. Karma finally paying him back for all the times life had knocked him down. As he was leaving the arena, a small figure detached itself from the crowd. It was a human woman in a diplomatic uniform. Her expression a mixture of admiration and professional interest. Jake Morrison? She extended her hand. I'm Ambassador Sarah Chun, Human Diplomatic Corps. I think we need to talk. Jake shook her hand, noting the firm grip and intelligent eyes. If this is about fighting without proper permits or something, I can explain. Nothing like that, she laughed. Actually, I think you just solved a problem we've been working on for months. You see, there are several other species who've been questioning human capabilities in various areas. Military, trade negotiations, territorial disputes. What you did tonight is going to change a lot of perceptions. Good, Jake said firmly. Maybe it's time they learn that humans aren't pushovers. Indeed, which brings me to my offer. We could use someone like you in the diplomatic corps, not as a fighter necessarily, but as a demonstration that humans are not to be underestimated. The pay is excellent. The travel opportunities are unlimited, and you'd be representing your entire species on a galactic stage. Jake looked around at the alien crowd still celebrating his victory, then down at the credit chip in his hand. 500,000 credits was enough to buy his freedom, but it wasn't enough to buy respect for his entire species. That, apparently, had to be earned one fight at a time. You know what? He said, grinning for the first time in months. I think I'd like that. But I have one condition. Name it. Next time someone wants to test human capabilities, they come through me first. I'm tired of my species being underestimated, and I'm apparently pretty good at correcting misconceptions. Ambassador Chin smiled and shook his hand again. Welcome to the Diplomatic Corps, Champion Morrison. Something tells me the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place. As they walked away from the arena together, Jake could hear the crowd still chanting his name. Behind them, medical crews were helping Zorax to his feet, the former champion looking dazed but oddly pleased with his defeat. It had been, after all, the fight of his career. Jake Morrison, former maintenance worker, former colonial marine, and current champion of the galaxy's most notorious fighting arena, allowed himself a moment of pure satisfaction. For the first time in his adult life, everything had gone exactly according to plan. Well, if you recall charging barehanded at a 3-meter-tall alien killing machine a plan. But then again, that was a human way. When in doubt, attack. When outmatched, fight harder. When everyone expects you to fail, prove them wrong in the most spectacular fashion possible. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were really capable of, and Jake Morrison was going to enjoy every minute of teaching them.